I am Anna Seawald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. My mission is to end violence against children. Through my work and this podcast, I help parents break generational cycles of trauma, reconnect with their authentic selves, and raise emotionally healthy children. Together, we've built a global community of conscious parents who want something different for the next generation. Join us as we create a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, the mental load of fatherhood, the power of showing up, and why anger is not a superpower. I'm speaking with Jon Gustin. He's the founder and owner of The Tired Dad, where he has amassed more than 2 million followers for his portrayal of life as an ordinary father and the lessons he's learned. Together with his wife, they have created the Tired Dad and Tired Mom podcast. He's also the author of a new book called The Tired Dad, 100 Reflections on Showing Up for What Matters Most. I had a pleasure speaking with Jon about what really means to show up as a father, not perfectly, but intentionally. We got into how to parent with consciousness even if you weren't raised that way, how to keep the bigger picture front and center when you are exhausted, triggered, or pulled in 100 directions, and why the real work of parenting starts within. We talk about anger, why it's not a superpower, even though so many men have been taught that it is. Jon speaks candidly about learning to move beyond reactivity and into emotional awareness, and how getting in touch with your own suppressed and repressed feelings is essential, not just for your mental health, but for connection, intimacy, and the kind of parent you want to be. This is an honest, grounding conversation about fatherhood, emotional growth, and choosing intention. Please enjoy, and thank you for listening. How are you today? Are you doing good?
I'm doing good, yes.
When do you record your podcasts?
Usually on Tuesdays with my wife, but with the book launch and everything, it's been hard to squeeze it in because I've been doing everybody else's podcast.
Yeah, always the case.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what do you want? Because, I mean, it's a type of a book, like we can talk about a lot of many things, right? I don't know where to go with this. If you tell me what is it that you want to share, what message, what are you passionate about, or maybe a topic?
Anything relating, the reason I wrote the book, the reason I do what I do is I just want to highlight fatherhood and highlight the involved dads that are really kind of doing it differently than before. They're more involved in domestic labor. They're more than just a financial provider. I want to bring dads more into the conversation of the mental load of parenting and their struggles through it. So really, I'm just highlighting fatherhood because when I first became a dad, me and my wife both work. We're both self-employed. The mental load of the house and everything, it was the same for both of us. So I was hearing a lot about women talking about mental load and stuff. I was like, man, I relate to that too. And there's a lot of other men out there that do relate to that. We just aren't as expressive about it. So I'm trying to create my vulnerability to have other fathers and men be vulnerable and express themselves through the struggles of fatherhood that originally, and kind of how my dad was and so on. It's kind of like, we don't talk about it. We are strong. We are providers, and we're the foundation, and the foundation can't crack. It was a big load on our shoulders that I think, as we see the decline of mental health in men and everything, that I think that weight needs to be lifted a little bit by sharing our stories and by healing ourselves and showing up as healthy minded, healthy physically fathers for our families because fathers are so important. Healthy fathers that are creating healthy masculinity for their sons and themselves and treating their partners a certain way is vital for the family dynamic in a nutshell.
It's great. I love everything about it. When you talk about the mental load of fatherhood, how do other moms react? Because it's sort of understood that it's the moms, right, who take the
Yeah.
mental load, the emotional load of motherhood. Do you hear from women, from moms, first of all? That's one thing I want to know, and then we'll dive
Yeah.
deeper.
Yeah. I mean, there are moms that relate to my dynamic, which is just the dads are just as involved as the moms are with everything. We aren't that clueless dad that's been portrayed in society and American culture like Al Bundy or Homer Simpson. We know how tall our kids are. We know how to take them to the pediatrician. We take them to the park. We have no problem with mom leaving for the weekend. We have it handled. She doesn't need to make a list for us. There's a huge shift in that. And I think it started with what I read in like 2000. This is American culture. That's all I can speak on. I know speaking to other cultures, this has been before that. The father became more just involved in the workings of the house and the workings of the children, being more nurturers and emotional providers, not just
Mhm.
go to work, come home, and that's it. That's your job. That's your role. There's many roles we play, and they're actually the most important roles outside of the job title. So there are a lot of moms and dads showing up in that way, but there are still the dynamic of the old school mentality of I'm financial provider and I'm not going to do anything else besides that, and the mental load can still fall on the mothers, and it's talked about a lot. We hear it a lot. And I also want to encourage dads like, hey, because that's how what I saw growing up, and that's kind of how I thought my marriage was going to be. And then once I had kids and the wife that I have, it all changed. So that mentality, I want to encourage dads to have a different mentality when it comes to it. That they're more than just a financial provider. They can be emotional providers, and they should, when they clock out of their work title, their job title, they come home and they clock into their most important title, which is dad, husband. There still is needs to be a shift, and I think the mental load statistically probably still falls on the women,
Mhm.
on the moms more than the men. But we're going in the right direction, I think,
Yes.
and that's what I want to encourage dads to for their homes.
But what I meant is, do you hear criticism from women saying, hey, you talk about the mental load for fathers. You don't know what we go through, that
Yeah, yeah.
kind of feedback. I mean, do you hear, because you're active on social media?
Sure. I mean, I've heard it all. I'm surprised sometimes at the misinterpretation of some of my stuff. And I think, I know that everything negative, every negative comment, everything is just a projection of what that person's going through. So if it's a negative, mean comment, they're going through a rough time. So any mom that would say that is just probably dealing with, she's overloaded. She has a mental load and she doesn't, and maybe her husband isn't showing up like that. And maybe their marriage is in trouble or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, if that's the situation, then they're obviously not going to take it very well if they're like, well, that's my husband's not doing that. So I don't like this guy talking about that because, I wish my husband was doing that, but he's not. And, I think that's where it would come from. But, me and my wife we've been through a rough time, and children changed our marriage drastically. And it was a big transition. We don't have help nearby. We don't have family nearby. So we did it all on our own. And we've communicated and gone through the rough seasons that I know everything my wife went through. And I know when I wasn't there for her, like I should have been, because I didn't understand things like postpartum. No one told me about that. She didn't even know what it was. And just also my ego and her ego and the lack of effective communication. It was a mess, but we learned through that and learned so much. So I know a lot about the women's mental load, and I feel I can talk about it just because me and my wife are so open with each other and we just communicate everything that we're going through. And she also understands maybe what husbands and men are going through silently.
And so, in the beginning of parenting, you and your wife didn't have this all figured out. It sounds like
Still
you,
don't.
yeah. I mean, the mental load part, it seems like at some point you understood that you have to share the mental load, or
Mm,
did you have conversations? Like when you say you also have a mental load, what does that look like for a man? The
mm,
mental load, do you share the mental load? Do you have like
mm,
meetings together?
mm.
How do you share this
Yeah.
load, right? In practical way.
Yeah, and it definitely started with conversations and now it kind of flows so naturally,
Hmm.
but there's no set roles. It's kind of like whatever needs to be done gets done. And the mental load for me is everything. It's a financial pressure to provide that way, but also my wife shares that too because she works. And, when activities, school activities, events, doctor's appointments, if one of our kids gets sick, one of us has to just not work that day and stay home with our child. So there's that mental load and just, I mean, everything. So all the inner workings of the home, there's nothing that I don't know how to do. There's nothing that doesn't fall on me as well as my wife. So it's not this pendulum all the time. The only way it's a pendulum is, you know, sometimes I'm at 80% and she's at 20, so I'm going to do everything. And sometimes it's the same, I'm at 20 and she's at 80 and she's going to do a little more. So that's how the teamwork happens. That's how the mental load happens is we just got to communicate with each other what our energy bar is at. And sometimes we're both 20%. And then that's just, we just, get through it. So, yeah, I don't know there's really now in present day, there's really nothing that falls on just me or just her. We're always helping each other out. There are things that we're better at. I'm better at cooking breakfast, so I cook breakfast every morning. We both do the dishes. I tend to cook a little more. So we just kind of find out what we're good at, and then just kind of help each other. We got through that with communication of, hey, you know what? I'm better at sorting the laundry. I'm going to do that, but can you fold it? Yeah, I'll do that. I'll cook breakfast. I'll get the coffee. I'll get the kids ready for school. That's fine. So we just communicate with what works and we don't let anything just, hey, that's not my job. There's nothing that's not my job. We're both raising human beings.
But growing up, it sounds like that's not how you grew
No,
up.
not at all.
Is your dad still alive?
Yeah, my dad's great. It was, growing up in the 90s, my dad worked a lot and wasn't, didn't cook dinners, stuff like that. It was a very dynamic of, he was working the most and my mom worked a little bit, I think, but yeah, it was that kind of traditional, you know, dad provider. And my dad was always there for me playing catch and all that stuff, but he wasn't very in tune with his emotions, very, very military background. It's just kind of how my grandpa was too. And wasn't very expressive. But nowadays, I'm trying to help him with that. He's 74 years old and he's still working through it. It's just, men don't give themselves permission to show emotion. They don't feel like there's any benefit in showing any sort of emotion and viewing it as some sort of weakness when the biggest strength is actually showing emotion and having emotional intelligence and being slow to anger and all that. I think in my book, I have about anger is not a superpower. And this sometimes men overcompensate for their insecurities and their ego by just being angry. And also, when they're sad, they get angry. So it's an emotion that feels, I guess, safe for them because they feel like it's masculine, but actually, it's weakness because they're not able to deal with what's actually bothering them.
How was that shift for you then? Having grown up with a father who was that quote unquote traditional dad who doesn't show emotion and things
Hmm.
like that was modeled for you and for many people. How did you broke that cycle yourself? What went into that? Did you get help from your wife? Were you just like that? Or like, I'm curious, what was that
Hmm.
journey for you?
Yeah, I've always been a big feeler and a deep thinker since I was a kid. I just always felt weird about it because I never saw it from the men in my life and my older brother. It was always this like stoic, just be a man and just don't, you know, just be a warrior and just no one cares about your emotions. So, but I had so much inside. So I expressed myself through writing and creativity, but I always kept it like to myself. And I never could have those deep convos with my dad because he didn't really understand that. And my parents got divorced when I was young. So I wasn't around my mom a lot. And she's kind of like that too. So my wife is very expressive and very emotionally intelligent. So she helped me so much after we got married and she saw it. She saw my potential in that. She knew I was a deep thinker. She knew I was emotional and she knew there was more than just what I was portraying. And it was a facade of mine to put this wall up and she saw it immediately. So she helped me so much with that to make me feel safe and to be, proud of that about myself and to become more of my authentic self. And just as I grew up and especially after kids and getting sober, I faced everything that I was holding in since I was, since puberty, since I was 13. And it's been work, a lot of inner work, but it's helped me so much on my journey and it's helped me so much show up as my wife's partner and as a father. So it definitely was not always like that. I definitely held the wall up, hold everything in, don't cry, don't show weakness. You're a man. But, in the past, I'd say 8 years, I've really entered this whole new realm of what it truly means to be a man.
Mm. And do you find it now comfortable in this new place of being a man? Does this
Yeah,
feel natural to you, or you're
it
still
does.
working through stuff?
I mean, I think we're always working through something. I don't think that the journey ever stops. We're always on a journey to be better. There's always some improvement on ourselves and our insecurities and our ego and these natural instincts that we have as human beings to be comfortable. And there's always an uncomfortableness about growth. So, of course, I still feel it, those, I guess, growth speed bumps. They're just not as prevalent, They're not, I have more tools in my toolbox to deal with it. And I know so much more about myself now that, yeah, it feels a lot more natural now to open up. And I think it's just funny now it comes so naturally to me that I think if I talk to other men that aren't like that, they're kind of like, whoa, this guy's coming in hot, And but yeah, it feels super natural and just with my online community and talking to so many people, there's just so many other men that relate exactly to that. And we all share that together.
What made you start this social media movement of the tired dad?
Yeah, it started out 6 years ago, 2020. I mean, fatherhood has been such an amazing thing for me. I truly feel like I've my whole life has been leading up to being a father, and I love it so much.
Well, can
And
I say why you love it so much? I know we hear these kinds of statements a lot, but it sounds like you're very honest in
yeah,
exploring and expressing. Tell me what makes it, so special for you personally. What do you love about being a father? I mean, it
oh,
comes with a lot of mental load and responsibility, right?
sure.
But what do you love about it?
Well, anything that's worth anything in this life is hard. There's nothing easy about anything. And parenting is a perfect example of that. Being a good parent is hard. I always say parenting is hard for good parents because if you weren't a good parent, it wouldn't be hard. So if you care a lot and it's hard and you're tired, you have your answer to whether or not you're a good parent. That's it. That's the intention that matters. But for me, I mean, it's like a little part of you, a little human being, and we have so much power as parents to change the world. I don't think we put enough emphasis on that because we think, oh, I just have one kid, I have two kids. Like, what's that? It's like that's the future of the world. You have so much power in raising human beings, and it's so much more. In the beginning, it can feel so task oriented and that mental load, and it just feels like you're drowning. But as they get older, and my children are 9 and 6 now, and I'm in such a golden era of parenting where they're actually becoming these intelligent human beings of all the stuff, all of our intentions with them, and all the characteristics that we've been instilling in them since they've been born is coming to fruition, and we're seeing the kindness and the empathy and just their personalities and their interests. It's beautiful. And I don't know anything in life that is that beautiful to watch a part of you grow up and to give them, to give them stuff you didn't receive as a kid and to heal your inner child. And it's just beautiful I mean, you think of an artist with a blank canvas, right? How excited an artist gets to get this blank canvas and to put their artwork all over it. It's that times a million. It's that times infinity to have a child in this world and to raise them into a human being that is going to grow up and go out into the world and share all the characteristics that you showed them in your home. I can't even, there's no money, success, nothing that even compares to it.
Thank you. I love that. So the emotions and sobriety or dependence on substances, talk to me about that connection. Like looking back, like what do you understand about, if you're open to just talking about
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, since I was 13, I've been using substances to basically get me through life and not deal with the problems in my family, to not deal with any emotional problems whatsoever. It was an easy fix. It was an easy band-aid. And I used that all my whole adolescence growing up. I used substances and alcohol. And as I got older, I started to control it better and lie to myself that I can have a good relationship with alcohol and take breaks and take time off and say, okay, see, you proved yourself. You don't have a problem. But after having kids and just kind of, especially after 2020 in the pandemic, I realized that there was going to be a point in my life that I wasn't going to be making my decisions anymore. It was going to be the substance, or alcohol really was the only substance left that I needed to get rid of. And I was just finally honest with myself that, look, since you were 13, you could never, ever have moderation. The first time I got drunk at 14, I got alcohol poisoning. You would think that would be, hey, you should stop. That didn't even faze me. So it's clearly, my grandpa wasn't, not on my dad's side. I never met him on my mom's side. He died of alcoholism. So I don't know if it's this genetic thing or it's just the personality that I have, but I have never had a good relationship with substances, and I'm not that person to have moderation with any of it. So I knew it needed to go because I didn't want my kids to get older and be dealing with this or have to, go to rehab or do something dumb and make a life-changing horrible mistake. It just wasn't serving me. It wasn't suiting me. It was a dangerous road that I knew was eventually going to just get worse and worse and worse. And my kids were getting older, and I didn't want them to see me like that. So I cut it off and I got sober completely over 3 years now. And that was hard. This is some of the hardest stuff I've ever done because everything that I held in for 25 years, I had to deal with. And I had to understand why I was running from things, why my insecurities, my ego, my problems, my childhood problems, and just everything, like everything. So it was a lot of deep inner work, but it was so worth it to go through that because it became such a better, more well-rounded, healthy-minded individual after that. There was no longer a band-aid. Now I was actually doing the work to where I didn't need a band-aid. There was no more cuts, you know? So it was important to my journey, and it's important that I was honest with myself that I'm just I'm just wired differently when it comes to that stuff. So
Well, congratulations on being sober for 3 years and doing this. I know it is very hard, but it's well worth it because, you set this intention, this goal, your children are motivating you, and that's an important thing. So, how does your dad relate to you now? Like, how do you open up about fatherhood, about feeling? Have you had conversations about your past and
oh yeah.
traumas and things of that nature? Now that you're in a different place, perhaps it's a lot easier, or you're eager to, revisit those kinds of things with your dad. Is he open? Talk to me a little bit about the nature of those conversations and what comes
Yeah,
out of it.
he's completely open to it. And, I was a hard kid to raise. I made a lot of bad decisions. And with my parents going through a divorce, and there was so much stress in his life, and I just added to it. But I was a dumb kid. Didn't know what was going on. So we were both going through our stuff. We were just handling it differently, But now we can talk. We're super open about it. And I'm open with, you know, stuff that I wanted from him that I didn't get. He's able to have reflection on himself, and he's able to take complete ownership and to know that he was not perfect, and he can admit all of his stuff that he did that he just didn't do. It's his first time living too. So, and we all have our stuff. So he's completely fine with talking about it. And I think it's healing and it's made our relationship stronger as I've grown into a father. And he loves to see me as a dad and do things differently and better than he did it. And I think as parents, that's what we should want. We could be great parents and we should still want our, they're going to say something. And I hope that my kids can talk openly to me about it and that I'm not going to get defensive. I'm not going to say, oh, well, you just had it so rough, didn't you? And put it back on them. I'm always open ears to my children and will always be that way. That I always want to hear them out, and however they feel is how they feel.
Yeah, it sounds like you are, lucky in the sense that your father is open to having those difficult conversations or admitting his faults or how he didn't do it right, quote unquote. That's important for your own healing, right? He's not showing up with denial or defensiveness. I think that's very powerful, and not everybody gets that chance in life because you might be evolved and healed or on a healing path, and you might go to your parent, but oftentimes people are not welcomed or accepted the way it sounds like your dad handled those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a gift for you and for him, right? So
Yeah.
both can grow. Let's talk about parenting kids, which is really challenging, emotional, right? It can be triggering, especially when we had traumas in our childhood. And we know, a lot of parents can be reactive, even though we set out to do it differently than our parents, but all of us lose our temper, make mistakes and all of that. Let's talk about how you handle those moments or how you show up. What's your inner dialogue? What tools have helped you to stay grounded? Or how do you, if you are reactive, how do you go and repair with your kids? Tell me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, like you said, we are going to mess up, and there's no such thing as a perfect parent. And I think it's not about not messing up. It's about how we recover from that. So if you yelled at your kids, did you just let that be a bad moment for you and a bad moment for your family, or did you apologize? Did you communicate with them why you yelled? Hey, look, daddy's stressed today. Daddy's got this going on and this. I shouldn't have yelled at you, but I did, and I'm sorry. I'm going to try to not do that anymore, but most likely I will do it again. So it's not because it's just the standard of perfection is just unattainable. It's never going to happen, especially in parenting. The hardest part of parenting is to regulate in the middle of the storm. You can have all the intentions in the world, and most of the time you're fine, but there becomes this moment where everything is overstimulating, the stress, and everything just comes to a head. And that is the hardest time to regulate. It takes, like anything, repetition. It takes failing, takes messing up and learning from your mistakes. And that's why I just have this one little mantra that I say to myself and say to everybody. It's just about keep showing up. That's it. You don't quit. And like I said before, it's how you recover. Don't let it fester. And that goes for marriage too. An argument. Do you just have the argument and say, yeah, I'm sorry, let's just get through it? No, because that's going to cause resentment. That doesn't heal the situation. Deal with it as soon as possible. So don't let it. Usually when there's a storm and there's an outburst, it's very short-lived, and then everybody comes back down, and that's when you apologize. That's when you say, I'm not going to do that. Don't sit in it too long. Don't sit in that guilt. Don't beat yourself up for days, weeks, because that's not doing anybody good at all. It's just, hey, I had a bad moment. I'm going to explain my bad moment, why I had it, and then I'm going to do better tomorrow. And that's all you can do. So, and I think the more and more times you do that, the better you get at it. And you find out what works for you. You find out your triggers. You find out, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be on my phone so much. Or maybe when I clock out of work, I'm done with work. I'm not going to continue with work during dinner. So we live in such a distracted society right now. It's very, very easy to get overstimulated and to get worried about everything, that I think we really need to control what we're consuming and putting into our minds and how we're balancing it all. I think that's the biggest.
Yeah. When you get together with other dads, do you guys talk about parenting? What are the conversations like?
It depends on what dads, but
It sounds like you have different kinds of groups.
yeah. And personally, I don't, besides like my neighbors and stuff, it's a lot of the time I'm just with my family. Like we don't have anybody here, and we do have a small group of friends, but we're so busy with everything, and we're so busy with our families and sports and activities and traveling with our family, that there's not a lot of moments that I'm sitting down with a bunch of dads talking about parenting. It's usually about something else, or it's usually we're in the middle of parenting where kids are running around and we're making sure nobody falls off the wall or something. So, and maybe we're taking the kids out and about. We're taking the kids to some place to run around and go to the lake or something. So we're always doing something with the kids that honestly, I really can't even remember the last time I was sitting around just talking to dads about parenting. It was all, I can't even remember. I'm just not in that season yet.
Yeah. How about on social media? How do you, and you're very honest, right? You're very vulnerable. You're very honest. That's why your message connects with audiences. What do you hear from dads? Do they request certain topics, certain conversations? Do they open up to you? What do you hear from them?
Yeah, I get a lot of dads opening up, and a lot of it is maybe telling me their situation with their partner and they're going through some troubles there. Maybe it's that I hear it's not all negative. I hear beautiful stories. I hear stories of dads taking a different job title, a different role that pays less, but they're around their family more. I get that a lot. I get a lot of dads that became sober and that are on their sobriety journey and making better decisions in their life. And yeah, I hear about the struggles that they're going through, or just that I validated their struggles, that, oh, they thought they were the only one. And you just said everything that I think about, like verbatim, you were in my mind. And that makes me feel less alone. So it makes me feel less crazy. And I'm able to deal with that now because I know that a lot of other dads are going through the same thing. And I think when you're validated and you feel less alone in your struggles, like I did in the beginning, and you hear somebody else, and like I just said, I don't talk to a lot of dads in person, and there's a lot of dads that feel that too. They're just consumed with family right now, and that's the season. So to know that we're all in this together, it's validating, it's calming, and you're kind of able to dissect what that is and deal with it and get better.
What do you think men struggle with a lot? Like, what are their challenges that they hide or don't talk about? I think they often even hide it from themselves or sometimes their partners, their wives, right?
100%.
Because of the culture that they grew up in and all the
hmm
other reasons that we talked about in the beginning. What do you think they are struggling with?
Well, the number one thing that I hear is if they're struggling, they're not telling anybody because they feel like their wife, their partner will get worried and feel
Mm,
they don't want, because they can see their wives maybe with that mental load or stressed out just in general. And if the dad says, "Hey, I'm this way,"
mm.
the wife will just freak out and say, "I thought you were
The
the leader
rock.
of this house.
Yeah.
I thought you were the rock. I thought you had this foundation and now it's cracking." Like, and they just don't want to put that on their partners. So they hold it in. And that's a big thing. And also that it will be held against them in some sort of way. They're fearful that if they tell their wives this, then they'll view them differently. They'll view them weaker, or they'll just use it against them and not validate them, but kind of just view it as like, well, you don't have your crap together. So like, I'm not going to respect you. And that's just what I hear is the fear. So, I have a big women following too. And the number one thing I hear from women is thank you for sharing this, because I think my husband is struggling and I'm trying to get through to him and I don't know how. But you just gave me insight to probably where he's at mentally. And so now I can understand it more. And now I know what angle to come at in talking to him so he can express more. And I hear success stories there all the time that worked.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's a big one. I think a lot of people don't think about, right? That the husbands don't want to burden the women with their stuff. Yeah, it's good that you are opening up those pathways and people, you're giving them a space and validate them. And that's wonderful. More and more dads are creating content. Every opportunity I get, I want to invite a dad to my podcast. We just had a conversation about the new fatherhood. Recently, I talked to another dad, Jeff from Ambitious Dads. It seems like everybody is almost talking, they have different angles, obviously, right? But they raise important topics. And it's important for dads to see themselves represented in the culture, to normalize the struggles, to give them language,
hmm
insights, how to express and get support, that it's not shameful, that they don't need to suffer alone. How about seeking mental health or working with professionals? Where do you stand on that? Have you ever worked with a therapist when like you were 13, when
hmm
your family went through divorce? Or tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about,
Yeah, I
yeah.
did work with a therapist when I was younger, but I view therapists and therapy like working out. It's, you get the most out of therapy when you put the effort into it. So when I was younger, I wasn't opening up to my therapist. I'm like, I'm not going to open up to a stranger. That's crazy. And so what I got out of that was nothing. I wasn't in the place to. And it's not, therapy is not something you just show up to and you're going to give half answers and half truths and you have to express to your therapist in order for them to get that information. They're not mind readers. They have their professional expertise in kind of reading the situation, but if you don't give the full story, then they're not going to know. So you're not going to get it out. So you have to be expressive with therapists to in order to get it back. So I 100% believe in therapy and think it's great for people as long as they're in a place where they will give it all. They will open up to that person because if you just think you're going to show up to therapy, just like if you just think you're going to show up to the gym and walk on the treadmill and lose a bunch of weight, you got to do a little more than that. So it's not about just going to therapy, it's about your mental being ready to actually go to therapy and get everything out of therapy. And I think find out what works for you. Be honest with yourself of who you are and where you're going to benefit the most.
Yeah. And men also are seeking support. There aren't that many circles for men, like in real
No.
life, like men's
Hmm.
groups. There's a lot of moms groups and lactation groups and things like that. But men have a hard time
Hmm.
finding that support system. And I'm very happy that this social media has provided that opportunity for, spaces like that to exist, for men to belong, and they have online communities often. So I think one benefit of social media is that, it creates opportunities like that.
Yes, it's not all bad.
It's not all bad. No, it's not all bad. Yeah, there are benefits. I mean, I'm living through your book, and there are 100 reflections on showing up for what matters most. And all of these are wonderful little reflections. And at the end of each one, there is a little question or a reflection directed to the reader. What are some of your favorite ones? Obviously, we can't read all of this. And,
Yeah. Hmm.
do you have your favorite ones from here? And maybe we can read a couple and leave the reader with some of those reflective questions.
Yeah, my favorite one that I think is extremely beneficial for people to read is the perspective one, The Power of Perspective. I think it's in the maybe the top 20, the
Hmm.
first 20. The Power of Perspective is great because like we were talking about that in the middle of the storm or what are some tools you do to kind of regulate yourself? I think perspective is one of the biggest tools we have that if we start out our days with perspective, that can change everything. Just putting things into perspective. And it's a touching kind of an emotional one that I try to hit with the perspective of we get wrapped up in everyday life and then sometimes we hear this tragic story and it just kind of boom grounds us into geez, okay, what really matters in life, let's focus on this moment. So that's one of my favorite ones, but I mean, there's one about my daughter, like Circles of Love, and there's so many. I pull from a lot of, it's not an advice book, so it's not something you're gonna get a bunch of advice and, okay, here are the steps. It's just simply my story, my reflections, my journey as a dad in the last 10 years where I was writing a lot and just how much I've changed in the past 10 years. I think my Carl Jung has the quote about life begins at 40, everything else is just practice. And I just turned 40 this year, but I feel that so much. I think because I changed so much in my late 30s, mid 30s, that it is, I always thought it was so scary growing up. And I thought 40 was like, you're like grown human being. And I realized we're always growing and we're always growing up and we're always learning. And I think that's the beauty of life. And you're always going to be, once a parent, you're always a parent. And you just value time so much more. Time is the most valuable currency when you get to a certain age. And, when you're in your 20s and teens, you think that you just have an abundance of time. And then all of a sudden you go, wait, what happened? What happened to the last 20 years? And here we are. But it is not as scary as I thought. And it is, gosh, you just, when you do the work and if you start to figure it out, you realize, oh man, life's just beginning. And no matter what decade you're in, there's always room to grow. As long as you're here breathing, you can work on something, enjoy something. Life is beautiful. That's another one of my passages about, and I reference, I don't know if you've seen the movie Life is Beautiful. It was back in like 2000. It's about like a Nazi concentration camp with a dad is with the son. It's heartbreaking, but also beautiful. And the dad is playing a game with the son to avoid the son knowing that they're in a Nazi concentration camp. And the son never realizes it. And yeah, it's tragic, but also like just such a beautiful movie that sometimes life is tragic and that perspective. And then also just being that protector and doing everything we can to give our children a beautiful life and to know that the beauty of life is just the moment that you're in, the beautiful moment that you to have perspective of that. So
I was talking to a friend yesterday and she was sharing a movie she watched and she said it gave her so much perspective on exactly what you're saying. And she's like, Anna, but tell me, why is it that we lose our perspective so often on day-to-day basis? She's like, we need constant reminders. We do want to parent differently. We have good intentions, but practical day-to-day life gets challenging and we lose perspective. I reminded her, I said, I know it's true for all of us. That's why I call it the practice of parenting, because we constantly need to come back, remind ourselves what matters, keep the eye at the longer path of parenting, right?
yeah,
Keep your perspective and update your perspective as frequently as you can, because it's so tricky. It just disappears so quickly.
it does.
That perspective is an important one. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your honesty, your vulnerability. I enjoyed this conversation very much. I think it's inspiring and it helps people to keep the perspective, in check. These type of conversations are, helping that perspective.
Yes.
So thank you so much for all you do and congrats on your book. Love the cover, The Tired Dad, 100 Reflections on Showing Up for What Matters Most.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Be sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes, and take a moment to leave a rating and review. It really helps others find the show. I would love to hear your thoughts and takeaways. Join the conversation in the Authentic Parenting Facebook group or visit the contact page at authenticparenting.com/contact to get in touch. Authentic Parenting is an ad-free show, and your donations is what makes this podcast possible. Support the show by visiting authenticparenting.com/support or becoming a patron at patreon.com. Your contributions make it possible for me to continue bringing you weekly episodes. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening. This episode was edited and produced by Ami Noor. If you need expert support to bring your dream podcast to life, from editing to full production, Ami Noor can help make it happen. You'll find his link in the show notes.